studio for another video. This is 2 of 2, so yeah, we're on a roll. And this week I said I would show you what's been on my painting table for the last few weeks, and in fact what I've actually done is get out what's been on my painting table for the last few months, because this little spread that you can't really see very well there, but I'll do some close-ups. Hopefully they'll be running now, so you can see what's on there. This is what's been on my table since October. So I'm doing taking part in a big Orcs versus Empire game next month, and when that was announced, I didn't really have much of an Orc army, didn't really have much of an Empire army, so I said, yeah, okay, great, I will do either of those things. I've got a handful of models for either of those sides that I can bring along, and the more I sort of thought about it, the more I thought, you know what, I've done a lot of evil, inverted commas, armies. I've got my Skaven army, I've got my Undead army, I've got my Familiar army, I've got various trolls and demons, and yeah, I've done evil, but I've not done a lot of good, inverted commas, armies. I've got my my Egyptian High Elf army, but that's about it. So I was thinking, you know, I could. This is a good opportunity for me to do some human troops, to do some Empire. So I got out my Advanced Hero Quest and my Hero Quest Wizards of Morcar expansion, got the Men at Arms out of there, and then dug around for a few more sort of human troops that I had kicking around, and was gearing up, getting everything primed and ready to paint an Empire army, and was then asked if I could join the Orc side. So I put all of that to one side on the shelf, got out as many Orcs as I had to hand, and it was not a huge amount. I realised that most of my Orcs that I have are the ones that I did for the Goblinoids combat cards set, and they're in a display behind me here, and not really based up for gaming, and I wouldn't necessarily want to put them on the game table anyway. So yeah, that was really going to be starting painting something from scratch, which was fine because we were going into October, so that gave me some good basis to start that month off with, and I decided that although I had a handful of Citadel Orcs, I looked on eBay, and the prices of second-hand Citadel Orcs, even though there must have been thousands of the things cast up, still quite expensive. But I had a handful of Ratham Orcs and some old Ralpatha, some old Grenadier, some alternative armies, fantasy warlord stuff. So I thought I'll get that painted up, and I didn't want to go for a very green, orky, Games Workshop kind of army. I wanted to go for something that was a bit more Lord of the Ringsy, and to my mind that means Angus MacBride paintings, essentially. So a bit of a sort of oriental flavour to the armour. It's definitely sallow skin, so greyish, grey-black, grey-brown skin rather than the Games Workshop green. So that was what I decided to do, and I had to buy in some more Orcs because I didn't have nearly enough to make up a 2,000 point contingent. So I bought in some more alternative armies Orcs. They're still available, doing very much the same thing that I did with my Undead army, which is to find old models that are still in production, and still fairly affordable, and buy those up instead. So I added to my army with some more alternative armies, fantasy warlord Orcs, and these guys, I want to show you just a few of these ones that I picked up. So these guys I'm quite proud of. They came up really well. So I'll show some close-ups of these. These are Prince August sculpt, the ones that you cast yourself. So a friend gave me some Prince August moulds a couple of years ago, and I hadn't got around to playing with them until the autumn. So I decided to have a play with those guys, and they come up all right. But the thing that was really wrong with them was the heads. The heads did not cast well at all. They were completely featureless. But I had some War Games Factory orcs that were very much based on the Angus MacBride illustrations, and I wasn't keen on the bodies. And they were those kind of multi-part plastics where they don't stick together particularly well, and they don't really look good in any pose that you put them in. But the heads were quite nice. So what I did was chop the heads off the Prince August miniatures and put the War Games Factory heads on. And they just, from a distance, particularly with the helmets, they just really helped them to pop. There's that whole faces and bases thing where if you've got a good face, a good head on a model and a decent base, to an extent your eye doesn't go too much to the miniature in between. And they work really nicely as a unit for that. They've got a proper sort of thrown together orky look. Obviously they're goblins in this sense because the orcs are bigger, but they've got what I consider to be very much that Tolkien orc look. Carrying on with that, I then did the same thing to my plastic Moria goblins that I've had for years and years and years and years and years, some of the few original figures that I've held on to. So I did the same thing, chopped the heads off and put the War Games Factory orc heads on those, and they work really well. They've got a really, really nice feel to them, so I'm very pleased with those. The commander of the army, this chappie here, is an old Asgard half-troll chieftain, and I saw this figure in Heroes for War Games when I was a kid. Didn't get hold of one, but managed just before Christmas put in an order with Viking Forge in the States for some figures. They still produce this guy and a lot of the old Asgard, so that was a really good opportunity to pick him up as a warlord and paint him up because I've been meaning to do it for a while. He's really small when you think of him being a half troll, even half troll. He's he's really small, but he works perfectly as an orc in this force. And then there's another guy that I just wanted to pull out. This chappie here, the Boy Boss, was the first model that I got as a kid, the first metal model that I went into a hobby shop, wasn't a Games Workshop, a hobby shop, and picked the blister off the wall and bought him. I think it was £3. Was this guy, not this one. This one is one that I sourced recently from a very helpful and generous member of the Oldhammer community. He sent me this chappie, so it was a good opportunity to paint him up, do a much better paint job, I hope, than I did when I was 8 or whenever it was that I got the other one. But so that's my orcs, and that's pretty much the contingent finished. Although I have got a couple of things more on my painting table to paint up for the orcs. But it got to beginning of January, and I was doing pretty well on the orcs. And I thought, you know what, I really want to get those Empire down off the shelf. I really psyched myself up to paint some Imperial troops now. So I did. So that's what I did. I got and actually found that these advanced HeroQuest men at arms paint up really quickly, and they look pretty decent, especially in a unit all together. But one of the things that I did as well was to strip a bunch of pre-painted miniatures that I had. When I was a kid, I used to go to various stately homes and reenactments with my parents, and I was particularly keen on English Civil War reenactments. So we used to go to Basing House, and we used to go to the Battle of Naseby, and we used to go to my grandparents lived in Basingstoke, so I used to go down to the museum there quite a lot, and they used to sell at the camps these painted 28mm English Civil War figures. So I had a bunch of those, and they were on display plinths, and I never gamed with them. They were just display pieces. And when I moved house, when I moved up to Bristol, they got shoved in a box, and they got battered around. And the paint jobs were all right. I mean, they weren't special by any standards, but they were all right. But they got a little bit chipped and a little bit dented. So I thought, you know what, I can use these. I can use these 28mm English Civil War figures in my Empire army, and I have since been to a few war game shows where I've seen these. I'll recognise these figures floating around, and I think they're Bicorn miniatures. So I think I'll be getting some more of these to add to my army. But certainly they make great witch hunters. So this guy is actually one of the first guys that I got, and it's very weird for me now to see him having painted him up in different clothes. It feels very strange, but he had a red jacket on before, and just yeah, I wanted to do a proper paint job, so I stripped these guys and painted them up, and changed the weapons on some of them. So the guy who's heading up my cannon crew got this new axe on him there, and the guy who's leading my pikeman, where's he there? He had changed his spear because he just had a long metal rod there before, so I gave him something that was a bit more recognisable. They look really good, leading the army there, and I'm glad that they didn't go to waste. I decided to put the commander's his Oliver Cromwell on a unicorn, obviously, naturally. So there, he's leading my army alongside, of course, King Charles, because we want to balance this out. So there's Charles on another unicorn. The thing that I'm working on at the moment is expanding my halfling contingent. I've got these old, what are they, Midland miniatures? Not even that old, I don't think. Midland miniatures halfling here, and a few. They're not halflings. They are armoured dwarves, but they're counting as halflings in my contingent, because I wanted fairly heavily armoured knight halflings to go with these guys, these goat riders from Westphalia miniatures. I love these guys, so I'm going to be picking up some more of their armoured halflings in the future. But for the moment, that's my small contingent. So I have got some denizen dwarves that I'm doing up as a continuation to the armoured halflings, and I just got a plastic sprue of halflings through that are a miniatures challenge for this month. So that's something that I'm going to be working on. Now, I have had a few messages, comments from last week asking me to talk about a few things, so I will start doing that next week. One of the things is this scenery. So I'll just lay this out here to look nice, but some people want me to talk about the scenery, so I will talk about this a bit more next week. I'll get a bit more of the table out and set that up so you can see what's here. Tied into that, I'll have a little look at basing, how I do my basing. Some people wanted to know about a basing mix that I used to do as part of Oakbound. So I will talk about the basing mix, and because I use that in my basing and in my scenery. So I'll do that next week. Yeah, keep your suggestions coming in for things to look at, things to talk about, and I shall see you next week. Take care.